In this video, we'll be covering error handling. The first thing I'm going to do is define a function, and we'll call this doDivision. And we'll take n and d for numerator and denominator as our arguments. And we will simply return the numerator divided by the denominator. So the first example, we're going to create a new variable called result, and then we're going to call our doDivision function. So for the first time, we are just going to run this without causing any errors at all. And if we print our result, let's just do that with string interpolation and our format. And if we save the file and run it, we get our result, which is a float value of 5. Because remember, the division is going to, by default in Python 3, will give us a float value whenever we do any sort of division. Okay, so in our next example, we're going to go ahead and copy this, except we're going to divide by 0. And let's go ahead and rerun this. Now this time we get a 0 division error. So in order to handle this, what we could do inside of our function is wrap this into a try except block. And we're going to go ahead and do that. So I'm going to copy our error. And it's when running a try except block or putting one in, it's best to be as specific as possible. So there's a generic exception, but so that should be like the final one, not the one that we anticipate. And let's say for the purposes of this example, we're just going to return 0. So a common situation, what a lot of people do is inside the except block, they'll log an error message. We don't have the logging set up. We'll do that later as a later example, but for now, we're just going to handle the problem, the exception, and return 0. So if we go ahead and rerun this, we get our result of 0 back. Now in this next example, what we're going to do is cause a different type of error. So I'm going to change this to 1. And this value is going to be 10 as a string. And so when I run this, what we get is a type error. So in Python, whenever we have the dividing operator, what we expect is both values to be numeric values. So what we can do is we could catch this type of error also. So we're just going to add new except. And let's say we want to return 0 for this also. So now that if we go ahead and rerun this, we're going to also get 0 for the other error that we're causing. Now there are situations where we can cause more than one error at a time. So I'm going to copy this one more time, except we're going to actually just take that and divide by 0. So in theory, this is a 0 division error problem, and this is also going to be a type error problem. So what I'm going to do is print both of these out, so when we hit these lines we can see when or if we hit these lines of code. Okay, so if we go ahead and run this, now we have on this latest example, so basically the error that we got back was the first type of error that it encountered. So it tried to do division, and the value of n, the numerator, was a string. So we should have received this error, but we received this one instead because that is the first error that Python ran into, basically. So if we were to fix the one problem and rerun it, then we would get the 0 division error. Okay, so in this next example, what I did was I copied the logging code from the logging tutorial, and we're going to basically have a logger in which we write the log to a log file. So a lot of times when you're dealing with exceptions or dealing with errors and such, you want to log those so you can look back later as to why the program didn't finish running. So what we're going to do is we're going to try opening a file. And normally we would do this with a context manager, but since that basically has some built-in like error handling stuff, like closing the file, and it does a lot for us without having to have this try except blocks. But since this is a tutorial on handling errors, we'll do it this way. Let's set our mode to W for write. And so this files directory does not exist. If I toggle the drawer open, there's no relative path to files, so we're obviously going to get an error. And so the first error we get is a file not found error because there's no directory, no such file or directory. So we go ahead and wrap this in a try except. So we go ahead and log that as file not found. And a lot of times what we do is the exceptions that we would anticipate are basically listed first. Anything that we do not expect to run into, we just use the generic exception. And we call e.message. So an unexpected error, we'll get some information about what kind of an exception it is. And then we can always, like in the future, add another specific exception that we would anticipate after we run into it, after we run into that problem. And the next thing we're going to cover is the finally clause. So what's important to remember about this is, let's say we want to catch an error and continue running. So the finally clause will execute no matter what. So if it's successful, the finally block will execute. If there's an error, the finally clause will also execute. So we'll just have a print statement here, finally. And let's say we want to close our file. Now normally if we use the context manager with f equals file open, that would handle closing the file automatically, but since we were manually doing that, we have to handle closing of the file. And so in this situation, we will get an error. Actually, I'm going to try this without the finally block. So what happens is if this results in an error, f is not going to be defined. So even though we're catching these files, we're going to run into this error. And since we are logging these, we can open our log file and see that we are running into this issue, file not found. Now, however, we ran into another error inside of our finally block because f was not defined. So what we could do is try running f.close. And then, so we know we had a name error. Then we could log that error as well. Now, one important concept to know is that we can go ahead and catch an exception, log it to our error logs, and then we can if we don't want the program to continue running, we can always re-raise the error. And so this will cause the program to stop right here. Just like before, we can catch a generic exception. And just like before, unexpected. And let's go ahead and rerun this. And since we have raise in here, it still stopped our code and we have this in the terminal. So if I go ahead and comment this out, this time we've basically got nothing in the terminal other than our print statement. But if we go and look at the error logs, then we still did get the name error recorded in the logs. So this covers the error handling tutorial in Python. Thank you for watching.